A senator asks one simple question, and suddenly a beer, a gold medal, and a $75,000 government flight are all on trial. Senate appropriations turned into a courtroom moment when Coons looked FBI Director Kash Patel dead in the eye and demanded to know exactly what his Winter Olympics trip cost American taxpayers. Patel's answer wasn't a dodge. It was a full-throttle defense involving Olympic security, a captured Chinese cybercriminal, and a secret deal he says he pulled off while the cameras were on him for entirely different reasons. But with allegations of excessive drinking already swirling and fellow senators taking direct shots at his judgment, one question hangs over the entire exchange. Was this smart diplomacy or an expensive excuse? Stick around, because this hearing gets a lot more heated than one line about a hockey locker room.
I appreciate each of our witnesses for being here today. During National Police Week, I just wanted to express my particular appreciation for the men and women of each of your agencies. When I was county executive, I was responsible for the second largest law enforcement agency in our state, and our partnerships with Marshals, ATF, DEA, FBI, and many other elements of federal law enforcement were really critical to our investigations and working to advance security in my home community. In just the last few months, the Newcastle County Police have worked with the FBI to arrest a suspect who had both plans and weapons to carry out a mass shooting at the University of Delaware. Worked with DEA to investigate methamphetamine distributors. Worked with the Marshals Service to arrest a suspect with a warrant out for attempted murder. These are just a few brief examples. I have other topics to get to, but if each of you could just briefly tell me, what are your plans for strengthening your partnerships with local law enforcement, and what more do you need from Congress to execute on those plans? Director Patel.
Thank you, Senator. One thing we always need more of is data from state and local. Anything we can do from a legislative perspective at the federal state level to get us that data so we can ingest the data and get it back out to our partners, that's critical. What we're doing to expand specifically at the FBI, for the first time ever, we stood up our LEPIC, our Law Enforcement Partner Engagement Council. So I didn't want to just hear from police officers from around the country by email and phone call. I embedded 10 officers and sheriffs and tribal officers permanently at the FBI because they're the best connected. And so for us, that's the best way forward, along with getting out into the field and making sure our field partners see and feel us and touch us and tell us what their problems are.
Thank you, Director.
Senator, more connectivity to our state, local, and tribal partners is the utmost importance at DEA. Due with the significant change in the landscape with synthetic opioids, with more methamphetamine pills coming in, more cocaine coming in, it's important that those state and local counterparts, the men and women that are on the front lines every single day, have the same intelligence and the same information that the DEA does. Part of this is coming from our capacity to build foreign partnerships.
The cost of a government official's travel can become a much bigger issue when questions of accountability and public trust are involved. That was the focus when Senator Coons confronted FBI Director Kash Patel over his trip to the Winter Olympics.
The amount of foreign partnerships and people we have downrange in Mexico and Colombia, that intel is critical to the beat officer that's working in rural areas. So we have to continue to be better partners, continue to be more engaged, and respond when they call for help to address violent criminal activity.
Director Seralto, I'm going to interrupt myself. I appreciate the work that you and the Marshal Service do to keep federal judges safe, but there's thousands of state and local judges who don't have the same intelligence network, the same resources. I'm proud to co-sponsor a bill with Senator John Cornyn that would create a new state judicial threat intelligence and resource center. It would provide security assessments for local courts and help local law enforcement make assessments about how to keep judges' homes safe and how to keep court personnel safe. It's passed the Senate unanimously. Do you have any opinion about whether or not the House should take it up and whether or not partnering with state and local court systems would help advance judicial security in this country?
Senator, thank you. Thank you for your work on that. My opinion will be is that any judge that we can keep safe, whether it be in state or the federal bench, we should keep safe. To that end, I'll tell you, judges make decisions that are life-changing, sometimes to themselves. So 50% of the time, someone is upset with the judge's decision, right? Yep. Whether they win or lose. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. The justices, judges, the judiciary are the pillars of our country.
I look forward to working with you on protecting and promoting judicial security. Director Patel, reauthorization of Section 702 is something I've previously grappled with, but we've not heard at all from officials from the FBI or the other intelligence agencies testifying about the proposed 18-month clean extension. Were you invited by Chairman Grassley to testify before our committee about Section 702?
What I recall, Senator, is that we and the FBI team have been providing briefings pursuant to the chairman's request. So we've done at least a dozen in the Senate and at least half a dozen or more in the House, including myself and Director Ratcliffe personally.
Okay. I have not participated in or benefited from any of those briefings. And doing oversight on the reforms that were put in place and how closely they're being followed is critical to my concluding whether or not I'll vote for an extension. Director, I have to ask you one last question. You attended the Olympics in Milan. How much did your trip cost, and to what extent did that help you carry out your mission as director of the FBI?
The central question is straightforward. How much did the trip cost? Who paid for it? And what was the official justification for the travel? Those details matter because senior government officials are expected to follow clear rules governing travel, expenses, and the use of public resources.
I greatly appreciate the question, Senator. As you know, the FBI and DHS are responsible for the security of the Olympics, the World Cup, the F1, the Super Bowl, and everything else. We had 250,000 Americans travel to Milan. We're proud that we stood up our jock there and had 0 major security incidents involving American citizens. And what we did was we purposely planned that trip around the Olympics because, as I mentioned in my opening, the top cybercriminal from the CCP was housed in Italian custody. While there, we were able to work an agreement, an arrangement to have that individual expelled from Italy instead of going back to China, like has so often happened in places like Serbia. Mm-hmm. And so we accomplished that mission, and we kept it quiet, and that individual was returned to America 2 weeks ago.
I was concerned that just before we went to war with Iran, a whole group of FBI agents were terminated, about 10, who were reportedly analysts with expertise in handling Iranian counterterrorism, fluent in Farsi, long experienced. I know there's ongoing litigation, but have you replaced them? Was there a reason for their dismissal? Do we have the capabilities we need to protect the United States while there's an ongoing war in Iran? The public reporting as to the reasons for their dismissal I found deeply troubling.
Well, as I've addressed earlier, I don't believe the public reporting is accurate. What we did do for the first time in FBI history is stand up the Iran Threats Mission Center that is housed inside the FBI with our Iran experts, including intelligence and analysts and agents, and we have seen a 47% increase in the arrest of Iranian spies.
Do you disagree that there were 10 Iran specialists dismissed right before the war began?
Yes.
Senator Haggerty.
A tense moment unfolded during a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee budget hearing when Senator Chris Coons of Delaware turned his attention to FBI Director Kash Patel's recent trip to the Winter Olympics in Milan, Italy. Coons pressed Patel on how a beer-chugging trip to the Olympics helped in his mission and what exactly it cost American taxpayers. The question arrived after footage of Patel drinking and celebrating with the gold medal-winning U.S. men's hockey team had already circulated widely online, drawing scrutiny over whether the trip represented a legitimate use of the director's time and government resources. Reports placed the cost of that trip, taken aboard a government Gulfstream jet, at roughly $75,000 to American taxpayers. The exchange became one of the more pointed moments of a hearing already charged with questions about the FBI director's conduct and judgment. Mediaite. In response, Patel offered a detailed defense rooted in the Bureau's security responsibilities. He explained that the FBI and Department of Homeland Security are responsible for security at major international events like the Olympics, the World Cup, the Super Bowl, and Formula One, noting that around 250,000 Americans traveled to Milan and that no major security incidents involving U.S. citizens occurred during the Games. Patel went further, insisting the trip's timing was deliberate rather than incidental. He stated that a senior cybercriminal linked to the Chinese Communist Party was being held in Italian custody and that his presence allowed the Bureau to quietly negotiate the individual's expulsion to the United States rather than a return to China, a deal he said was completed discreetly and resulted in the suspect's return home roughly 2 weeks later. Whether that justification fully answers the senator's question about cost and mission relevance is something reasonable people can debate, but Patel clearly wanted the hearing record to reflect a law enforcement rationale rather than a purely social one. The Olympics trip did not exist in isolation. It surfaced amid a broader and more damaging narrative about Patel's personal conduct. The confrontation over the Olympics followed a separate, heated exchange with Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, who questioned Patel about a recent magazine report detailing alleged excessive drinking, prompting Patel to angrily deny the allegations as categorically false and to say he would not be tarnished by what he called baseless claims. Van Hollen pointed to reports that Patel had been so intoxicated and hungover that his own staff had to force entry into his home, arguing that an incapacitated director cannot properly perform his public duties. Patel, for his part, fired back by referencing a controversial meeting Van Hollen once had connected to a deported individual, while also taking a swipe at the senator's own spending habits during a heated back and forth. That larger context matters here because the Olympics question from Coons wasn't an isolated jab about a vacation. It was one thread in a hearing that repeatedly circled back to whether the country's top law enforcement official has been exercising sound personal judgment. Reaction from other lawmakers in the room underscored just how seriously some senators took the optics of the trip. Senator Patty Murray of Washington bluntly told Patel that if he wanted to hand out liquor or pop champagne bottles in a locker room, he should stick to podcasting rather than serve as FBI director. Outside the hearing room, criticism had already been building. One Colorado congressman had previously characterized the Olympics trip in far harsher terms, framing it as an example of misplaced priorities and improper use of taxpayer-funded travel. At the same time, Patel found support among Republican senators during the hearing, who praised his broader record leading the Bureau, illustrating how sharply divided reactions to this episode have been along political lines. The FBI itself had pushed back on early claims that the trip was purely personal, maintaining that it had been planned well in advance and involved legitimate meetings with Italian law enforcement and the U.S. ambassador. Stepping back from the individual quotes and counterquotes, this moment captures a recurring tension in how the public evaluates officials entrusted with enormous responsibility and equally enormous budgets. A single viral clip of a locker room celebration can overshadow whatever operational justification exists behind it, and that is precisely the trap Patel now finds himself navigating. His explanation about the cybercriminal handover may well be true and may well justify the underlying travel, but the failure to proactively communicate that reasoning before the images went viral allowed the narrative to be shaped entirely by optics rather than substance. Public officials, and especially those overseeing federal law enforcement, operate under a higher standard of scrutiny precisely because their travel, their conduct, and their judgment are funded by public money and carried out in the public's name. Whether or not one believes the Olympics trip was operationally justified, the episode is a reminder that transparency offered early is always more persuasive than transparency offered defensively after the backlash has already taken hold.